So I had a big production planned out to do this Dune video, but if you might be able to tell, I got a puppy. And some plans had to change so that I could both take care of the puppy and keep shooting videos. Regulars know I don't like Dune the book. I have a two-part series on exactly why that is, and you can check it out over here. I just reread it this past January in preparation for making this video, and I ended up giving it 3 stars because it does have some qualities that are worth admiring, and I wasn't as taken by surprise by all these elements I didn't like. Check out that summary over here. All those feelings aside, I am still really excited for Dune as a movie because I love fantasy science fiction stories, and I'm really hopeful that like the success of Dune Part 1 and Part 2 will bring us into a whole new renaissance of new fantasy science fiction movies. I had some mixed feelings on Dune Part 1, and you can catch a lot of that in my 5-minute spoiler-free review here. But my general takeaway was that if you watched Dune Part 1 without reading the book, you'd be a little bit lost, and I thought I would jump into some of the similarities and differences, get prepped for Dune Part 2. So let's start by comparing the opening scene of the movie to the opening scene of the book. In the movie, we start on Arrakis, aka Dune. We're getting a first-person perspective from Chani, who is, spoiler alert, Paul's main love interest, but they haven't met yet. And Chani is talking about Arrakis from the Fremen perspective. The Fremen are the locals who live on Dune and are being oppressed by the higher Empire monarchy, fighting back against the Harkonnens, who are the current rulers appointed by the Emperor. Harkonnens retreat, but it's not for anything they've done, it's because the Emperor has decreed they leave and somebody else come in to take their place. And Chani expresses how the Fremen as a whole are not exactly excited about whoever the new ruler is. They just sort of see it as like a same shit, different day kind of vibe. Meanwhile, in the book, we open in Caladan, which is Paul's home world. We have Jessica and the Reverend Mother watching Paul sleep and discussing the potential for him being the Kwisatz Haderach. It foreshadows the harrowing experience with the pain box, which is now infamous and featured later in the movie as well, as you really can't do Dune without featuring the pain box somehow. But the takeaway from the book scene is that Paul might be the guy or he might not be the guy, but it's very important they figure that out right now because he's about to go to Arrakis, which is going to be very dangerous for his health and the health of everyone around him. So some things, the difference between these two scenes are telling us: the movie is going to have Chani and the Fremen be important characters. We're going to really strive to tell the story of Arrakis, aka Dune, from their perspective. I suppose we're trying to give like more of a local indigenous flavor to it versus like imperial strangers coming into it. This opening in the movie gives us a great intro into the Fremen as like a strong, proud people, value where they live, or looking to live in harmony with their land, or if they want to make changes, it's them doing the changing slowly over time with a better understanding of their own planet and their people's needs, versus these outsiders who have come down to mine spice in a way that is not healthy for the planet and interrupts them in their day-to-day living. And it does a good job explaining that the Fremen are largely voiceless about who does or doesn't rule their planet, what the rules are on the planet, how mining goes, and it really sets up the idea that Paul and his family, House Atreides, who are coming in, are going to have to prove themselves to the Fremen instead of like House Atreides coming in nobly and wanting like an immediate alliance with them. The whole focus is different because in the book, that intro sets us up for this to be about Paul and the Atreides. Specifically, we're wondering if Paul is the Kwisatz Haderach. And if Paul is the Kwisatz Haderach, we have to ask, like, how will he survive living on Arrakis, aka Dune, long enough to fulfill his destiny? So instead of the movie being very like Paul-centered, larger world, it's like honing in specifically on Dune and the native people's plight, being the Fremen here. And if we're going to talk about the plight of the Fremen, we can't do it without talking about spice. A lot of this is probably going to be clarified in Dune Part 2, but just in case, we're going to do a quick review because there is some information here you probably should have known going in. So the movie does explain that they're mining spice from Arrakis and that spice is necessary for space guilders to navigate in space. But it kind of makes spice feel like it is a fuel, or maybe like a resource like mercury is in thermometers that tells you what temperature. Spice does something like that, and that's not really the case. Spice is more like a cross between an expensive seasoning and a drug. Noble houses add it to foods and banquets to show off their wealth. People seem to have a euphoric experience when they ingest small amounts of spice. When spice is taken regularly, it makes people healthier and live longer. People eat spice in the Empire recreationally, but they also do it to enhance their work performance. But it is dangerous to eat spice, and if you eat too much, you can overdose and die from it. You can also get addicted to spice and need it consistently for the rest of your life to survive. And the impact on spice varies widely based on your tolerance level, the frequency of how much you take, your gender, and your genetic background. Spice is actually in the air in Dune as well as in the ground, so all residents ingest a large amount of it. Whether you're native or whether you move there to mine spice, you end up being bound to the planet as a result. It's little surprise that such a large resource is used in a variety of ways. It heavily seasons most of their food. It's used in religious rituals that allow their Reverend Mother to see possible futures. And spice is used to make mundane things like paper or clothes, but it's also processed to make things like explosives. So obviously the Fremen find spice to be a highly valuable, somewhat sacred resource that's necessary for all social, cultural elements of their life, and they don't appreciate these offworlders coming in and staking claim to it and taking it for their own uses. But it's more than just a fight for resources. The way the Empire mines spice in large quantities actually does damage to the environment of Dune, and it makes it less likely for spice to continue to be created on the world. And additionally, a Fremen long-term goal is to terraform their world so that there'll be more water readily available for everyone, and spice can't be created in garden environments. So the Fremen's ultimate goal to transform their world is in direct conflict with the Empire's desire to continue to mine the natural resources of Arrakis. But moving on to the next scene in the movie, we move into Caladan. This is Paul's home world, and it's like an austere, large, medieval-ish castle kind of place. The perspective switches to third perspective, so we don't get like that natural insight into Paul's inner workings and mind. We catch Paul dreaming about Chani on Arrakis, and we get a scene with Paul and his mother having breakfast and discussing like paperwork processing for House Atreides to take over Arrakis from the Harkonnens, which is a lot of info dump all at once for non-book followers. And we see Paul learning about Arrakis in like a hologram YouTube-y kind of way. And keen eyes might notice a lot of imagery of bulls and bullfighting, which relates back to a story in the book that really isn't relevant, so I won't bring it up here. And if we go to the book to see if we can find a scene like this, there is no one single scene that kind of encapsulates all these little moments and elements. Paul and his mother, Lady Jessica, are very close. I don't think they do a great job encapsulating their relationship at any part of this movie, to be honest. They must be going for a different kind of relation dynamic entirely based off of how the actors are portraying them. The dreams of Chani are in both the book and the movie, but the way that Paul thinks of them, remembers them, and utilizes them are so different. And this scene might also be trying to like establish the Bene Gesserit as an order and what they can and can't do, but they mention it very like carelessly, and I don't think a lot of it is ever really well fleshed out in the movie. So for me, this is where the movie really starts breaking down and showing a failure to communicate a lot of big ideas, concepts, world-building elements the book expresses very well. And part of it is a challenge in adaptation because within the book we get so many little head-hopping moments and different perspectives, and everyone knows a little bit of something that's going to bring us to this larger tragedy and allows the readers to get a whole view and really fully understand things. And in the movie, it's hard to follow like main characters who don't know certain things and also express that information to them. It looks to me like the movie is trying to get these points across through visuals and casual asides, but I think it is really hard to follow if you don't have like that grounded lore basis to start you off in. I also think this is part of why the movie starts us out from Chani and the Fremen's perspective, because their point of view is very easy to understand. Now that we're over here starting to like set up Paul's story and the part he plays in it, we have to talk about like the Empire, their larger politics, these other factions that kind of work alongside them but are slightly outside of them. And it doesn't work well in this medium. I feel like they really fail to get it across. So let's break it down. Within the larger galaxy, there's this dude called the Emperor, and he rules all of known space as far as we can tell. His reign is broken down into a bunch of different noble houses, and he sort of gives them their own fiefdom and job, and they report back to him. Within this group are the Harkonnens, who originally owned Arrakis, and their job was mining the spice there. They're very brutal, they've kind of destroyed their own world through industrialization, and their way of dealing with the Fremen was trying to exterminate them. Another of the noble houses is House Atreides, which is the home of Paul, Lady Jessica, and his dad, the Duke. House Atreides lives on like a really nice planet. They're known for their kindness and their generosity. They're quite popular among the nobles. The Emperor feels threatened by how popular House Atreides is among all of his noble houses, so he gives them Arrakis, knowing that the Harkonnens are not going to let that stand and will do his dirty work for him. Now, Lady Jessica, Paul's mom, and the Duke's consort is part of this group called the Bene Gesserit. And the Bene Gesserit are a group of only women who have a bunch of fantastic powers. They seem to be able to completely control their body using their mind. They are able to use this thing called the voice, which forces people to do their will. And they also are able to sense truth when people speak. And then they also have this one thing called the Reverend Mother, and she's able to see like possible futures and do some other kinds of stuff. They infiltrate different areas by becoming consorts to noble houses or becoming useful to powerful people. And from there, they kind of like sow their own mythology and their own goals and plans. They're kind of important because, first of all, they work a little bit outside but alongside the Emperor, but they're also important because they have like a mysterious goal. And Paul features very heavily into that goal because the Bene Gesserits only bear female children. Apparently that's something they can control thanks to their training. And they do this specifically so that no Bene Gesserit traits travel onto a male person, because a male with Bene Gesserit training will be something special called the Kwisatz Haderach. But generally speaking, attempting Bene Gesserit training as a man makes you go crazy and you end up dying. So they've been like very carefully, strategically planning when this male will come in. But Lady Jessica disobeyed the rules. She had Paul as a boy to please the Duke. And now there's like a big rush to see if, even though this isn't how they planned it, if this boy is going to be the Kwisatz Haderach, because that's a special something. Him going to Arrakis puts his life and all of the plans that Bene Gesserit have been working to into jeopardy. There's nothing conclusive by the end of Paul and the Reverend Mother's meeting in either the book or the movie. And meanwhile, Paul's dad's not stupid. He knows that going to Arrakis is kind of like a trap, and he has his own plans in motion to try and keep his family safe and maintain their rule. And basically his idea is that he's going to make friends with the Fremen, they're going to form an alliance, and then he's going to be able to use the Fremen as his own personal army to keep everyone else out. The Duke's plan here can be seen both as like a kindness, an extension of his generosity that he showed on his own planet, but also like this cold calculation, because the Duke sees Arrakis as very similar to this prison planet that the Emperor keeps, where he trains his most elite and vicious soldiers called the Sarkonon. And we mentioned the Sarkonon a little bit in the movie. They come and help the Harkonnens retake Dune, but they're even more heavily emphasized in the book, and there's a lot of direct one-to-one comparisons. This is kind of important because it shows how harsh conditions can create a very strong, powerful, and intelligent people. The main difference between the Fremen and the Sarkonon are that the Sarkonon were originally prisoners, so they have this like vicious, evil, diabolical element in them, and they also have a certain level of brainwashing obedience to the Emperor. Meanwhile, the Fremen are just like a group of people with their own society and culture. They're loyal to themselves and to each other, and because of this, they have like a significant higher level of intelligence and ingenuity. So seeing the two of them go head to head is quite interesting. There's just like a lot of contrasting foil elements between the two that I think will be especially interesting to look at moving into Dune Part 2. You know, honestly, there's hours and hours of stuff I could talk about. The movie sort of glosses over or doesn't explain very well what the book gives you significant detail and little elements that really help you enjoy aspects of the movie more. But I think these couple of tidbits that I gave you should really help you get set up and thinking about the right things for Dune Part 2 and might help clarify what's going on in Dune Part 1. Overall, I am really excited to see Dune Part 2. I just rewatched Dune Part 1 a couple of times actually to give this recap, and I'm still struck by the visuals and the music and some of the elements that we just barely scratched the surface on here in Dune Part 1 with Arrakis and the Fremen. We should be getting a significantly more in-depth and up-close look of here in Part 2. I'm so ready for those sandworms, guys. But what did you think? Does Dune Part 1 do a great job summarizing and setting us up for Dune Part 2, or did you want a little bit more information than you got in the movie? Are you looking forward to Dune Part 2 with me? And as always, keep reading. Bye!